Thanks very much.
No problem. I'm assuming you can see my screen.
Yeah, I can see that. So hopefully everyone else can. Thanks very much. I'll put myself on mute. Okay, thanks, Anup. Over to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. As Paul said, my name is Anup Chalisey. I'm the Professional Head of Infrastructure here at RSSB, and today I'm going to talk to you about the work we're doing on standards for stations. Yeah, there you go. So just kind of content. So what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a little bit of introduction and background. Going to discuss the current standards framework, proposed work we're doing, proposed standards with some case studies, and a summary and next steps. So before I kind of carry on too much and delve into the detail, I'm just going to take you through some nice pictures we have, or photos. So in the first instance here, we got University Station at Birmingham, and this is kind of the final concept design. I've actually been, and it's almost looking like that now. We got a Crossrail station down in London, West Ealing, that opened up over the last 2 or 3 years. So it looks slightly different, but looks nice. And lastly, we got, I think this is quite iconic, the Glasgow Queen Street in a station in Glasgow, not surprisingly. As you can see, all of them built different areas of the country, different sizes and shapes. They all look very good, innovative, and look like they meet the purpose. So what is the problem? What are we trying to do here? So anecdotally, we know that the current standards landscape or for stations isn't working. It's not clear. There is a national strategy or standardized approach to building design. This leads to inefficiencies. So, we're on projects are doing good work somewhere. Someone else might be doing the same thing and starting from scratch. So we're reinventing the wheel unnecessarily. And there is, of course, a cost implication to that. Also, as importantly, where do the lessons learned go? How are we improving as an industry? We need to know when we're doing good and when we're doing bad. Accessibility and inclusivity are not embedded as well as they should be, and I'll come on to that later. We have multiple standards covering the same topic. For example, fire, lighting, which takes precedence. Building regs also apply, and we have railway standards that cover the same topic. Which do we use? And lastly, within the railway standards, we only cover station grounds. And more specifically, they only cover the engineering, construction, and safety aspects of stations. So at the moment, the problems are, as stated at the top, we don't currently have a clear idea of what we're trying to achieve nationally. We have inefficiencies and lessons learned don't live anywhere. There's no central place for them to go. So what's the opportunity? As I mentioned earlier, there are multiple standards, not necessarily all aligned, available to industry. Some are RSSB, some are Network Rail, DFT. You have other member bodies that also produce standards in the stations arena. And then there are the British standards, Euro norms, and ISOs. And they all sit at different levels in the legislative framework. These documents, the ones specifically I've shown there, RSSB, Network Rail, and DFT, the Code of Practice, are now due for an update. So they're due for an update, and this has presented a unique opportunity, and some have said it's a once in a generation opportunity to work together to create a suite of documents that would be built from the top down, working together. So we would have a DFT document, RSSB document, and network rail documents that would all align as they would be developed together. By doing so, we think it'll be a comprehensive suite of standards to replace the current set, which is fragmented and not necessarily complementary with one another. It will hopefully lead to better and good design, which we believe will add long-term value to our built environment and result in a better passenger experience. So before I carry on, I do want to explain a bit more about standards and the current standards framework. So here is a diagram here, and on the x-axis you can see the scope of standards. On the y-axis you can see the force behind standards. We're at the top, you got the railway specific legislation or legislation, and at the bottom you got guidance. In terms of stations, we have, in terms of stations, we have, as you can see at the top, in terms of the law, we have the code of practice that we need to follow, along with the NTSN, which is the National Technical Specification Notices. And then we have other documents, some created by RSSB, so 7020, which is the standard for platform widths, heights, and offsets. And then other industry standards, company standards, and finally voluntary ENs, ISOs, and the like. There's a whole huge number of documents, and I've just stated that at the top level, but it's a problem because when you're covering the same topic, it's not clear, especially if you're not familiar with this diagram, which takes precedence. So if you have two documents, and even if you do, we have two documents such as a guidance of code of practice that are of the same force, which do you use? This is where requirements, rationale, and guidance need to be clearer to help the person using the document understand whether or not the documents ensure the scope they're hoping to deliver is fulfilled by that document. So what are we proposing to do? So we're proposing to develop and agree a national policy, and this will possibly replace the code of practice, and I'll talk about that a bit more about that later. And this would set out the vision of what stations should look like and who they should serve. We're proposing a new suite of documents that will have a wider scope. It will cover the public realm to the platform train interface. So the public realm is where the land or the area in front of the station from which can cover up to, for example, bus station, the car park, or a bike station. And this is important because when you talk about things like accessibility and inclusivity, you need to have it from where passengers and the public come into the station, not just on the station grounds. And like I just mentioned there, we'll include topics like accessibility and inclusivity, cybersecurity, sustainability, and etc. So what will this look like? So it's the same diagram before. We're hoping, so where you had before the code of practice pointing to this, the code of practice will cover everything here. It will be the vision by which all these documents will support the vision. We're hoping to create a new suite of standards, and this will be the first port of call people go to for any station design, whether it be new or renewal. From these documents, they will then signpost to the relevant NTSN, the policy, any network rail or company standards, and then the relevant European standards and the like, and lastly, the guidance. So just to reiterate, we're hoping to create a suite of documents from which it will be the first port of call for people who want to design or upgrade stations. And we believe this is important because this will be a central place where people will be confident that when they're going to these documents, it will be up to date and the state of the art. So what are the benefits of doing this? It will be whole industry strategy. So creating these documents would ensure will be done collectively with the industry. So we would promote consistency and efficiencies. By having a central place to create these documents, it'd be easier to get input from affected parties. By having a consistent and efficient way of working, we would help set future budgets, so we get a better idea of what the budgets would be. And we can set vision in a collaborative manner. So all these documents will go through the relevant committees, so Infrastructure Standards Committee, which I chair. They have members from throughout the industry, so suppliers, infrastructure managers and the like, and technical experts from, for example, building and architecture. So we're making sure the right people are involved. Like I mentioned before, a clear hierarchy and place to start for stations work. This will ensure there's one place to go for everyone working in that domain. So it'll also assist specifically for projects requirements with improvement of overall benchmarking. And it will also set out design specification for stations facilities and components such as canopies, furniture, cladding systems, and the development around stations. Like I mentioned earlier, the new suite of documents will have a wider scope. It'll cover the public realm to the platform train interface. And I think, like I said before, it's really important that we do so, especially in regards to accessibility. But we're also going to have topics such as, and this is something that came across to me very, very clearly, that it was an important topic, such as arts in stations. It's not that stations should just be a grey, dull box people get to and just move through. When you're building stations in areas, there should be part of the fabric of the community, and that kind of topic is kind of overlooked. Not many people kind of are aware that these are things that the industry have been trying for years to get in, but due to cost, it's not been possible. But designing in, maybe it will be in the future. And lastly, it will ensure standards can be updated more regularly to reflect best practices and lessons learned. I think by having it in a central place where we get this data and information, we can reflect that. So before I move on too much, I just do want to talk about and kind of give you why we're doing this. One's the most important, why we've got these stakeholders on board. One of the biggest drivers for having, and the biggest benefit, and actually the ensuring the business case stacks up, is around accessibility and inclusivity. And there are loads of topics in this area I could talk about, but I'm going to stick to one at the moment, which is danger area. But before I go through that, I just want to talk about the code of practice and where accessibility and inclusivity sits regards to the law. So the Railways Act states we, or the Secretary of State, must produce a code of practice protecting the interests of users of railway passengers, services, or station services who are disabled. And the purpose of the code, and that code of practice is now designed for accessible stations. And the purpose of the code is to ensure that any infrastructure work at stations makes railway travel easier for disabled passengers. It applies to services provided by operators in GB in relation to trains and stations, And it also identifies European and national standards, including the PRM NTSN, which I mentioned earlier. It is relevant for all passenger train station operators in GB, and licensed operators must follow the code. So as a condition of their license, whenever they install, renew, or replace infrastructure or facilities. In itself, the code doesn't have any unique requirements. It instead references requirements from the relevant standards. So that's the code. And then we have other documents that help support the code, like I said, the PRM NTSN. But I will give an example of why making sure we embed accessibility into our standards and make it clearer is so important. So here's a picture of a platform. And in this picture, you will notice there are two sets of tactiles. And this is an example of confusion that can occur due to having multiple standards for the same topic. So we have the PRM NTSN, which you need to follow by law, which states you must have what's called the danger area. And the danger area, depending on the platform and the traffic going through it, sometimes, or the platform sometimes requires a line for aerodynamic risk. So this is a platform where a train will go through at high speeds. In this instance, the PRM NTSN states that you should have a tactile and this tactile is here to tell persons who are requiring visual aids, telling them where the edge of the platform is. So this is a hard stop saying from this point onwards, the edge of the platform is a set distance. This line here tells you that there's an aerodynamic risk. You need to be behind this, in line or behind this line to be safe from the trains going by with regards to aerodynamic risk. We have other documents. We have GART 7020, so requirements for platform height, offsets and width. And when we have another document, RIS 7016, which is the interface between station platforms, track trains, and buffer stops. This sets out actually something different to what's required by PRM NTSN. And you've got to remember that PRM NTSN was developed alongside colleagues in Europe, mainland Europe, and they have different requirements out there. So we in GB over the last 5 to 10 years have done our own research, and a recent set of research, T1118, optimizing design and position of platform markings, designed to keep people away from platform edge, showed that having two sets of tactiles is actually it can actually be dangerous, because this line is very important in telling people where the platform edge is. It helps with access and egress, and having two sets of tactiles is actually quite can lead to dangerous situations. So therefore, we in GB do something different. But in order to allay this confusion, the DFT have recently, in the last 6 months or so, sent a letter to the industry saying we follow our rules rather than the PRM. But this is only because of the research and everything else, but it's not clear if you don't see that letter. So that's a failing by us in the standards world and in wider industry by not making this clearer. We're hoping things like this won't carry on. So that's one really important aspect of why we need clarity. Second one is around sustainability. So the government has created key policy instructions that underline its commitment to the sustainable development of our railway. The policies set timetables for actions in many areas, including equality. So we need compliance in that by 2030. Biodiversity net gain by 2035, removing diesel-only trains from our network by 2040, and net zero carbon rail by 2050. Alongside these government policies and instructions, the rail industry has created its own. So we have the WISP, which is the Whole Industry Strategic Plan, and the SRB, which is the Sustainable Rail Blueprint, and that's been published recently. So in order to support these, I mean, in terms of the background I've given here and the policies I've mentioned, I'm not aware of any standards that support these regulations, policy, or strategies. And these need to be developed because the industry is crying out for them. So for stations, potentially, these would be in the form of, like I showed you in the diagram before, you'd have a set of standards that would be compliance, everyone would need to comply with. You'd have a set of, and these would, for example, cover design principles to take into account the anticipated change in climate over the next 30 years and beyond. So net zero, we talked about biodiversity and etc. We need to have company standards developed, which would look at the how. So how to achieve what I just said, the type of materials, how do we source them, maybe drainage, capacity, and then we'd need design standards, you know, the real granular stuff, which would cover whole life principles. For example, the circular economy. How can we make sure assets, once they've reached their design life, can be reused or repurposed? Should we be building for 100 years rather than 50 years? So those are some examples of kind of things we need to consider. So that's the sustainable framework. But in order to develop all these, there are kind of two big things that we need to consider. One is money. So in order to enable these changes, there needs to be committed funding from government or within the industry, if that is at all possible, considering the last few years' economic and the budget cuts or the funding gap we potentially have. So, for example, knowledge gaps have made it difficult to demonstrate the value of resilience investment. This has led to largely reactive approach to resilience investment, with repairs and maintenance focusing on like for like, rather than like for better. So that's one of the ways that we, as an industry, if we want to be sustainable, we need to be cognizant of. The other thing is any standard created, I can talk about this all day, but ultimately for any standard that needs to be created, it needs to gain industry consensus. So as an industry, we need to be aligned and we make understand the impact of new standards and requirements. And like I said before, this is more important than ever with the economy and funding the way it is. The other thing we need to discuss or talk about in terms of sustainability is risk. We may need to change how we view risk. So in some instances, it may mean accepting an increase in risk or a reduction in risk to achieve sustainability targets. So perfect example I can give from my world is over the years we've improved design and installation immensely, but there are times where we do receive deviations regarding a non-conforming installation of a platform or track, and in this case, and it's by very minimal, and in these cases, is it right to do more work considering the risk profile isn't that different? Do we grant deviations against these non-conformances, considering would it be more sustainable to allow the non-conformance to stay if we deem the risk isn't high enough or the risk hasn't changed? Same again for maintenance. How do we maintain our assets so they have a longer life? So in this instance, decrease our appetite for risk. do we have? We need to look at how we what our maintenance limits are based on. Is it an asset life of 30 years? Do we need to maintain them tighter to push the life of these assets out to 35 or 40 years, maybe longer? So it also means us being braver as an industry. We'll have to try new things without procrastinating much. So these are all questions we are currently working through with wider industry that we hope will lead us to requirements we can embed in the documents. So I've spoken a lot about what we're going to do and what it might look like, but what is it? What's the nitty-gritty? What is actually happening? So the Code of Practice, the Design for Accessible Stations, the DFT document, will be out for consultation soon. In the first instance, because the wider standards work won't be completed for a while, the Code of Practice, once out for consultation, will be kind of a quick kind of update rather than the policy I discussed earlier. It will be we're just going through the consultation response that we're proposing. We'll just say the links need to be better. Here are some gaps that are missing, obvious gaps that are missing. Can you please add those? So that'll be out soon, and that's what we're working on, the response to the consultation. Work has been commissioned and is currently underway on with a consultancy where they are looking at all the standards that are currently used to design stations. Which do we use, which don't we use? Because there are documents that we don't use that maybe we should do. Whilst looking at those, they'll be looking at the guidance. Is there guidance that's missing? Can it be made clearer? And lastly, but not least, are the gaps. What are the gaps? What do we need to focus on that can help the industry design better? So that's due imminently. Once that's we received those that report, we'll be setting up a few meetings internally and with wider industry to develop a scope for the documents we're going to develop. And we're hoping to do that in the next 4 to 6 months and start drafting early next year. So to summarize, I gave you a little bit about the background and the problems we have and the opportunity we now have to develop a national policy and a suite of standards that will help centralize and align with the standards framework. I also mentioned that it won't just look at engineering, operational, construction, safety aspects. Where possible, we'll set out requirements that consider the social impact of stations. And lastly, before I get into this, actually, lastly, what I didn't mention in the slide before was completion date. We're hoping we start early next year that the documents will be ready in 2 to 3 years after starting. And so, so I'll just move back onto this. Lastly, we want to involve as many people as possible. So, like I mentioned before, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity here to develop a suite of documents that sits across the, top down, developing from top down. So we really don't want to miss anything while we're developing the scope and the standards. So if you feel you know somebody or you yourself could help, or you think there's information that we could use, please do feel free to email me and let me know, and I'll get back in touch with you. But so that's everything from me today. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Anup. I've got a couple of questions there. First of all, before I start, I'll just ask one myself. A couple of points made there, but I'm always asking this, I think, Anup. But it's the sort of, is this mainline only, or would this incorporate like London Underground, metros, and maybe even down to light rail?
So
Could it?
in terms of the scope of the documents, I think it can be used for all. What we tend to do is mainline only, but the answer is it could be used anyway.
Certainly, I would personally support that. I think the supply chain and the industry, the messages I get would support a suite guidance and standards across the whole industry. I'd be welcome any feedback on that. Meanwhile, first comment I got here is from Graham James, who's made some comment about the stripes and tactiles against the platform. Now, I don't know if you want, Graham, if you're still there, to sort of make your point or just further. You want to turn your mic on and add to the conversation, or is it that? No. You just want to see.
I think I can read what he said. So I think there's two questions. So I'll start from the second question. He says, have existing guidance documents been systematically reviewed to identify areas of conflict or overlap? The answer is yes. I think that's one of the problem statements we have, is that they do overlap, conflict, and part of this work is to kind of ensure that doesn't happen. The second part of that second question is there any possibility of reducing the number of individual documents that need to be referred to? I can't promise that. We are hoping to clarify and make it simpler to follow. The idea is to make it simpler, so hopefully, but whatever you do get out of us, it will be clearer. The first bit of his question, the first question he has is, okay, yeah, so I think it's a more of a bit, it will be extra, it won't be extra guidance. I think any design we do will complement what's already out there. We're not trying to do anything extra. It'll all flow from one to the other. So if someone does criticize us for saying yet another competing set of guidance, we will have failed in what we set out to do.
Okay, thanks for that, Anup. And I think the next point is about the lines and tactiles around that's from Vlad, as a guest. I don't know if I'm sure it's a question now. It's clarifying what he understands to be the dimensions are there. That's anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think the point I was trying to make was the second set of tactiles, the grey one. Currently, the research shows, and actually now it is confirmed, we should be following the rules about not having a set of tactiles. It's confusing for those that are visually impaired. Having two sets, it's like us and the white line. You know, normally we know we would never walk past a white line. That is the edge of the platform. It's the edge of the platform for the visually impaired. So having two is confusing.
I think I'll make an observation on that as well. I think these things need to be practical, and you can see in that picture with the two sets of tactiles, there's actually very little space at the back of the platform then, and I've encountered this. Of course, we need to try and respect a clearance to high-speed trains. I think at the same time, you've got to sort of respect the passenger needs space on the platform. I'd be controversial there in terms of daring to cast an opinion as a passenger. So it's quite interesting. But I'm pleased to see that, as no doubt you are, that there's greater awareness of platform staff in terms of encouraging customers to keep away from the platform edge. And I've noticed that actually significantly recently. And anyone else has got a comment, I'd welcome that. I'd like to just raise another point in terms of, we're talking about maintenance as well, I think, aren't we? In these standards, so I think that's great. So, for example, there's a sort of issue with lighting, I remember, on the underground, Anup, when it was highly desirable to have lighting right above the platform PTI, platform train interface. But equally, in terms of maintenance, I remember us trying to get a maintainable bit of railway. We had a challenge. You can't maintain it easily over the PTI. Any sort of comment on that? How we balance that?
I think the easy answer is, I think nowadays with modern technology, you probably could with remote condition monitoring and remotely, maintain it. But I think you're right in terms of maintainability. We are going to the way in terms of sustainability as well, ensuring that we design once, we design once and design well, rather than cheap and cheerful. I think that's the ethos we're trying to push out.
Yeah, so there's some challenges you've got to get there in terms of practical and maintenance. So welcome to our world back for those that are not aware of those challenges. And it's great that you're going to acknowledge those in the standards. Question from is Rami Shautu, which is, are you considering any current / future work with EU partners as part of this work? Thank you for that.
So we're not specifically as part of the standards going to be working with European colleagues, but we do, a few people in our group do go to European working groups where these topics are discussed. So we're not doing it in isolation. We are talking to colleagues out there and taking on best practice.
So they're like a consultee stakeholder, I think.
No, so when we create Euro norms, we have a rep that goes on behalf of the GB to these working groups, and they would be aware of what their colleagues are doing Europe-wide.
Okay, thanks. And another question to come from Ed Harris is, who's funding this and the version managing the version control standards and funding that team that will be monitoring it? So and he says he thinks it's a good idea. Thanks for that.
Okay, no problem. So this will be done as part of the RSSB suite of standards. So it's funded by the industry, by the members, and we've got the capacity and resource to do so.
Okay, I think we've got another couple of points. Yes, a good point again, Ed. Thanks very much for this. And I've constantly get this on PWI training, by the way, which to just tuck in a little advert for. Don't forget to look for PWI training. But what looks good and photographs, examples, good, bad, and the ugly. I've been putting in my recent talks about managing service routes around the railway. So is that so? I'm sort of adjusting your point there, Ed, saying not just what looks good, but perhaps what looks bad and ugly. How do you feel about that, and that suggestion from Ed?
Yes, I think one of the learning tools we think was the kind of the most impactful are case studies. So I think that I absolutely support that. You know, what looks good in terms of case studies. What looks bad, as long as we can redact it, not blame and show blame. But yeah, that's also a useful learning tool.
Absolutely, indeed. Thanks. An interesting point from Adam Collett. Fond memories of this, Adam. Thanks for raising it. What we call compromise platforms, because you've got a multitude of rolling stock running on systems with regard to PTI height and lateral distance. So overground and underground and subsurface and tube stock, different platforms. I think what's the actual point? Are you addressing that? I think it's saying as well.
So compromise platforms, are we addressing that? I think we could be here all day if I started going into a technical thing, but
yes, please, Anup.
Yeah.
I think the others might not.
Yeah, no, I think the honest answer is it's been acknowledged that what we're doing currently in terms of the funding we have and everything else, it might not be possible to get right, get from really bad to perfect every time. So it's an ongoing discussion where not being compliant with standards may be possible if all other scenarios are out, out the window because of cost or anything else. I didn't really answer the question, but I'm not saying it's not either.
Well, I think it's really helpful, and guidance, perhaps I would add to that. Thanks, in terms of guidance of what's a tolerable, practical solution. So, for example, humps are clearly a tolerable solution compared to complete platform renewals and that sort of thing. So, will you be giving some sort of short-term, medium-term guidance to become more compliant?
Yes, I think the answer is short answer is yes. We'll definitely be more in that area. I also noted, Paul, there's a hands up from somebody on the chat. I think it's
someone see it's from someone. Whoever that is, would you want to ask you?
Sorry, it's David Woods. Apologies. Hello, Anup.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah, I've just put something in the chat around the platform edge position, and learning best practice and lesson learning. It is an area that I think we got to a reasonable position a few years ago where there was a lot of noise within the industry, but it is an area of contention, and it is quite stressful for some people trying to get those tolerances and understanding how they work. So I just want to put it out there. Welcome anything where we can communicate best practice and knowledge like this. It's a great step forward.
Yes, absolutely. I think
thank you for that, David.
Yeah, with CP7 and the funding cuts, I think we just need to be more practical and pragmatic.
And are you going to have different levels of guidance for sort of major stations like New Street versus sort of country stations and that sort of thing?
That's a great question, Paul. I think the categorization of stations being, A to D and E or whatever it is, isn't something we're touching at the moment. We're going to try and give guidance that covers everything, but I think there's another piece of work within GBR TT that they're doing to formalize the categorization of stations, and like you said, and I think it'd follow on from that.
It could be a little bit more controversial. I think it will. They can cut me off if you wish at the centre. I think, in terms of helping prioritise budget allocation and management as well, in terms of, for example, aiding sort of crossings adjacent to stations or footbridge alternatives, mobility impaired access, helping, for example, where the country and the industry might allocate funds to more priority stations. Is that going to emerge from your guidance? Are you with me? What I mean?
I don't think it will in terms of prioritization and everything else. I think we will be able to point towards. So I'm going to, since you've been plugging, I'll be plugging as well. We've been creating along with DFT a footbridge standard that will cut across all modes, including highways, and we've worked with TfL. So to answer your question, we're hoping that these documents will help set policy, but the work itself won't be doing that.
Where I'm going on, everybody, but it's really sort of got me going. So the footbridge, some footbridges are very difficult to fit into the existing station envelope 100% in accordance with guidelines and standards. Sorry about the background noise. And I just think that sometimes the people need guidance in terms of a quick win solution, which would be tolerable but would reduce the risk, because some stations are screaming out for improved facilities because of the safety risk. Sorry, did you get my point there? And I hope that came over okay despite the background noise.
Yeah, it did. It was fine. Yeah. I accept that. I think anything that we can add or help in that world with the guidance, considering even the cost of doing these things, is something we're looking at.
Okay. Well, I think I'm very well. Thanks, Anup. And it's great to sort of move away from the sort of pure track from the PWI, show that they're embracing the whole railway infrastructure. And as you can gather, I've got a bit of experience and a passion about stations and PTI. And I think that was really helpful. Thank you, Anup, and I wish you well with your enormous task ahead. And I'd love to support you as other members of the PWI would as well, I'm sure. Thank you. I mean, I think it'd be good to have a piece in the journal. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And if you would like to show appreciation by unmuting, if you wish, and applauding Anup in the usual manner. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you.
Cheers.
Yes, thank you very much. Cheers, thank you.
But I've got to be as quiet as I can because I'm in a public space. Thanks very much, Anup.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Right, thank you.
Excellent. I thought that was interesting. You've got a challenge there, Anup.
Yeah.
Deliver that.
Yes, yeah. We can talk about when at the next London section meeting.
Yeah, amongst all your other things, you got the challenge.
Yeah.
But you've got someone who's running the standards at TFL now to contribute to that.
Sure. Not sure. But yeah, I'll speak to them as well. But
Well,
yeah,
especially with their section 12 underground stations. But sometimes I think you can gather, but I think we need to have practical standards. Okay.
brilliant. All right.
Okay.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
We're okay with that, Sarah. Thank you very much, Anna. Look forward to seeing you again, face to face, Anna.